Good morning, dear children. Hope all of you are doing well at home. First of all, I'd like to appreciate that many of you are responding quite well to all the assignments being given to you. Keep responding, keep learning. I expect the same from the other students also. Now, for today, I am telling you an overview of the chapter, a short summary of the chapter from the Snapshots, the second chapter, that is the address by Marga Minko. To understand this chapter, I will first give you an overview of the story by talking about its background, about its author, and about the characters and key points of the story. Marga Minko, she belonged to a Jewish family. She had 4 siblings. Unlike all her sisters, brothers, and parents, Marga Minko escaped being arrested and went into hiding during the World War II when Germans invaded Holland under the rule of Nazis, that is Adolf Hitler. Now everyone died of her family, only she was the one who escaped. So the setting of the story is post-World War II in Holland. The Jews were persecuted, that is, they were not treated well. This story tells about events before and after the war. It tells how war brings not only lot of destruction and death, but also how it affects the lives and behavior of humans. How war causes disturbances, upheavals in the lives of the people of Holland as they lost their not just lives but also their homes. Now this story is of a young girl, a young Jewish survivor who has lost her entire family in the war. She returns to find her mother's things at a particular address, which is the title of the story. Dear students, please note, the address plays a very significant role in the story. The address is 46 Marconi Street. Now this girl, this narrator, the young Jewish girl, comes to this address for some reason that we will discuss in the slides to come. Let me introduce you to the characters of the story. The main characters of the story are the narrator, who is the protagonist, the main character in the story, plays a positive character, and her mother is Mrs. S. So we have 2 mother-daughter pairs here. One is narrator and Mrs. S, the mother of the narrator. Then we have a lady called Mrs. Dorling, who is the antagonist in the story. She also has a daughter, a 15 years old daughter, and these are the 4 main characters of the story. The setting, as I told you, is Netherlands in Germany before and after World War II. The theme of the story is that the memories of the pre-war times. Pre-war times means before the war. Those memories constantly remind the narrator, this young Jewish girl who survives the war, of the things that she has lost in the war. She lost many things. She lost her mother, who died. She lost all her belongings in the war and also her house. This is the theme of the story. Now, as I told you, this is a story about loss and regret experienced by the Dutch Jews who were inhumanly persecuted, not treated well by the Nazis during the World War II. The story begins when a young Dutch Jew girl knocks at the door of an apartment the address of which her mother gave her before she died. Before the mother died, she had told her about Mrs. Dorling and her address. Mrs. S. had also told her how she had left all her belongings in the safe hands of Mrs. Dorling. Now, let me tell you here that Mrs. Dorling is a non Jewish woman. She does not belong to the Jews, to the family of Jews. So, it was not a risk for Mrs. Dorling to be living at a place where the Germans were against the Jews and they were not treating them properly. Mrs. Dorling lived in a neighborhood area of Mrs. S, and she offered to Mrs. S to keep her belongings safe till the war was over. So, Mrs. S, as I was telling you, had told her daughter, that is the narrator, that she had left all her belongings in the safe hands of Mrs. Dorling. The narrator decided to go to Mrs. Dorling's house after the World War was over. She thought it would be safe now to go there and get her things back. The narrator goes there. She rings the bell of a house and a middle-aged woman answers her knock. She opens the door. But she does not make any expressions on her face as if she has recognized this young girl. She refuses to recognize her identity. The narrator tells her that she is Mrs. S.'s daughter. The woman stood staring at her. The narrator realized that perhaps she had rung the wrong bell. But soon her doubt was dispelled. She had a doubt initially that maybe she has come to a wrong address, but the doubt was dispelled very soon. It was over because she notices that the woman is wearing a green knitted cardigan, and this cardigan, dear children, belonged to the narrator's mother. So there was no mistake. She came to know about it. She felt that she was at the right address. She was very sure about it. And the woman was very much Mrs. Dorling and no one else. Mrs. Dorling regretted that she could do nothing for her. She asked the narrator to come at some other time and she closed the door. Now, reluctantly, unwillingly, the narrator leaves the house and walks towards the station, trying to recall what her mother had told her about Mrs. Dorling when she was taking away their nice things, their valuable things, like silver cutlery, antique plates and vases for safety, because she was not a Jew. She also remembers that her mother had told her that she should remember the address that she had told her. That is, address was 46 Marconi Street. Now, unable to get her belongings out of her mind, the narrator decides that she should go to Mrs. Dorling once again. She should go to her house once again. And this time, when she reaches her home, a 15-year-old girl who was the daughter of Mrs. Dorling, she was alone in the house and she opened the door for her. And this time, the narrator is let in by this daughter. Now, the narrator was in the middle of all those things that belonged to her mother, that once belonged to her mother. All the things like silver cutlery and antique plates and large vases and the tablecloth, everything. But she was hurt to notice that all those things that were so precious to her, that were so valuable to her because they all belonged to her mother, they were the memories of her mother, how they were tastelessly arranged and kept and shabbily used by Mrs. Dorling and her family. No doubt, those articles very much aroused nostalgic feelings in her. But she thought, the narrator thought, that the true owner, that is the mother of the narrator, that is Mrs. S, she was the true owner of those belongings. So she thought that these things that belonged to her mother, the owner of these things is actually not there now. No more. She is no more in the world now. So the narrator resolved, she decided firmly to forget all those things. Not only that, she also took a firm decision to forget this address, 46 Marconi Street. It was the address where all those nice things were lying uncared and neglected. She didn't like this idea, and she decided that she would never come back to that place to retrieve her mother's belongings. The detailed story is actually a moving account, an emotional account of how the familiar objects arise memories of the past, and how narrator ultimately decides to forget the address because she felt that severed is cut off from the familiar surroundings. The precious objects that belonged to her mother had no value for her now. So she decides to forget the address. So finally, we come to the climax of the story. There's this line that I have showed up on the screen. This line comes from the text that we are going to read from tomorrow onwards. At the corner of the street, I looked up at the nameplate. It said Marconi Street. It is written Strat here. It's misspelled because I took this line from somewhere. I had been at number 46. The address was right, but now I no longer wanted to remember it. So finally, what happens in the end? Narrator decides to give up, tracing back to the memories of her past and to stop searching for her past, for her lost belongings. And the reason is because she felt the things had lost their value because the person to whom those things belonged was no more. I hope you have understood the story, the crux of the story, dear children. So next time I'll take the chapter line to line. Keep the book in front of you. Bye-bye.